We'd like to start with how you have elicited such consistently positive feedback from your final year students through your teaching, and especially how you've managed to craft an interesting and intellectually stimulating experience for your students in your classes.
Right, well, interestingly enough, I think the first answer to that is around actually be interesting to hear what the students have to say about what they're seeing. That I do. But I think that answer also speaks to what I'm trying to do in the classroom, which is to think about the students first and foremost. And I guess the way that I actually do that materially is, through some simple structural things. So for instance, never kind of talking more than about an hour before I give them a break. So actually factoring in time for breaks. So what I often do is I'll start with a concept, but I'll always find or think about some kind of activity that we can do to ground that concept. I'm very keen to bring theoretical concepts into practical application. So to design activities that we can do in the classroom, which I know it's limited what you can do in the classroom. At the same time, I try to stretch the boundaries of what can be done in the classroom. I try to get people up and moving around. I get people into different kind of configurations and groups. So for instance, when we talk about organizational change, when we talk about the needs of leaders in organizational change, one of the things I do is I get everybody to stand up and just change seats where they're sitting, because people get into very fixed patterns. They sit in the front, they sit in the back. So I get the people in the front who sit in the front to sit in the back. And then I say to them, now, what was that like? And so I try to ground concepts as much as possible in people's experience. So I think those are some of the principles that I work with.
And do you find the students always happy to engage and take part when you're asking them to move seats?
Yeah. Generally, it's not too difficult, but I think it's because of the way that I go about doing it, which is that I kind of, well, first of all, I do build a relationship with them. So I won't do that on the very first day that I'm with them, for instance, and I build a relationship over the course of the module with them. I learn all their names. So for me, I know the module that I teach, it's about 70 people, 70 to 80 people. So actually I can learn their names. They do reflection notes for me as part of their assessment through PebblePad, and I mark those assessment notes, and I mark them personally. So I get to know them over the course of the module. So by about halfway through, they're pretty much willing to do what I ask them to do. But it is, I think I have to stress that it is a question of building a relationship with them and building trust between them as well.
So it's a partnership.
Yeah, it's a partnership. Yeah, very much so.
Okay, so question 2. How do you make your sessions interactive? Apparently there's been some feedback. Some of the lecturers have been described as dull and boring and read from PowerPoint presentations, especially in a 2-hour class.
Yeah.
Now, how do you navigate that?
Yeah. PowerPoint, it's one of my pet hates, really. I mean, I remember, I've been around for a while. I remember the old days of acetate slides, and the great thing about acetate slides is you could switch them around. You could see where the energy was in the room, and you could work with what was going on in the room. And I think I still bring an acetate slide mentality to my teaching, even though I'm working with PowerPoint. I use very few words on my PowerPoint slides. Actually, some of the Chinese students in particular have criticize that because they use the PowerPoint slides for revision. Mm-hmm. I tend to just use slides with photos on them. I use a lot of pictures and a lot of graphics. I think next year what I will do is I'll use the PowerPoint slides with photos in the classroom, and I just speak to the topic and then do a second set with bullet points. But I try to use the PowerPoint to do the things that I can't do by speaking. So by showing graphics, I use a lot of video clips. I use a lot of film clips. I try to break up the pattern of my delivery, because they say that, I think studies have been shown that people can only really concentrate for about 40 minutes. I think with the younger generation as well, it's probably much less than that. They're used to getting, data so quickly. So trying to break up the rhythm of the delivery, trying to get them moving around, trying to get them doing different things, those things have all been helpful in trying to encourage a more interactive classroom.
Yeah, and just riffing myself, do you find that this would encourage attendance, the fact that all the information is not up there online for the students to have a look at, or it doesn't necessarily make some sense, that they come along and therefore they get a lot more added value?
I think so. I mean, basically you can't, if you just look at my PowerPoint slides, you don't know what's happened in the class. And the assessments are very much geared around, especially the reflection notes. They actually have to come to tutorials in order to be able to answer those reflection notes fully. So yeah, I think they quickly learn that if they just look at the online materials, they might have a sense of what happened, but the learning really, I try to make it so that the learning does happen as part of an interaction in the classroom.
Okay, moving on to question 3. How do you manage to juggle delivery of content with activities in the class? So this is a perennial fear for colleagues who think that they have so much syllabus to get through and possibly fear the loss of control involved.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I studied learning. My PhD was in learning itself, and one of the things that study taught me was, that the classroom is not necessarily the best place for learning, that if we try to make it really content heavy, people learn things maybe for the exam, but they don't actually learn things that they can apply. And I'm lucky. The module that I teach is leadership practices. It is very much geared toward application and toward trying to connect theories with students' experiences in their own work environments, if they've done sandwich courses and so forth and so on. So I really purposely try to limit the amount of theoretical content per session. So there may be 1 or 2 kind of real key theoretical ideas, and then I'll build the session around that in terms of, okay, what activities can we use that will then support that theoretical concept. So the balance in my classroom is more on experience and application than on a lot of conceptual knowledge. But again, I'm lucky, and I know that some of my colleagues here teaching core curriculum maybe feel that they have many more concepts. I suppose I would just encourage people to really question the amount that they try to get over in class.
Sure. So could you think of a practical example?
So for instance, when I teach organizational change, there are many organizational change models, and I say that at the beginning. But then I'll say we're going to focus on 2, and we're going to focus on 2 very different organizational change models so that they have a contrast in terms of how people have been thinking theoretically about change. So for instance, we will work with John Cotter's model of organizational change, where he has a very structured, linear approach to organizational change. And then we'll look at somebody like Ron Heifetz, who has a much more organic approach to looking at organizational change. And so we just look at those 2 models, and then I'll get them to think about those 2 models in relation to their own work experience, which seems to have more resonance, get them to go into different groups. So I'll get the room split. So I'll have some people looking at Cotter's model, some people looking at Heifetz's model, and then I'll get them to do a bit of group work and maybe have a bit of a debate, for instance, about the differences between these 2 models. So it's all about trying to get them to really deepen their appreciation of these different theoretical ideas and how they might be applied, what their shortcomings are, to really trying to engage the critical faculties.
Yeah. So learning through doing and experience. And,
And also having to say, I mean, I have a very interactive classroom, so it's a conversation. I see learning as a conversation rather than just me trying to dump information into people's heads. And I think often when people have to articulate something, you know, even if they have a very shady understanding of it, the process of articulation means that they can come to understand something that maybe they didn't know that they understood. So that's what I'm going for in the classroom.
Okay, so moving on to the next part, which leads in quite nicely. So one of the other difficulties is engaging the students to a degree where they are happy to learn outside of the classroom and off their own bat. How do you encourage students to read and learn between your sessions to come back?
To be honest, I'm not sure I've cracked that one. I'm not sure I've cracked that one. I guess the mode of assessment that I use, so I use continual assessment through the module where they have to do reflection notes after each of the 4 tutorial sessions. And in order to get the highest marks on those tutorials, they have to show that they've done outside reading as well as the core text that I use in class. I have found that for those students who are motivated by the possibility of getting high marks, that actually does motivate them to do it. And also just in terms of the in-class discussion, you know, I try to encourage people who have read a bit more to share what they've read in class, and I think that helps. But I do think it's difficult, and what I also try and do, as well as getting people to read text, is I give people video clips to watch. I find getting people to look at things on YouTube, even getting people to look at lectures by, you know, because there's so much on YouTube right now. You know, if you've got a theory like John Cotter's theory, you can just go watch John Cotter talk about it. And I think, you know, trying to engage with students in the way that they like to engage, which is, you know, often using video rather than text, and those kinds of mechanisms, I think those things I do see people are picking up more on that. The other thing that I do at the beginning of each class is that I have a slot whereby if people want to get practice with their presentation skills, presentation is such a key aspect of leading, they can find a video clip that they want to introduce to the class and talk about the video clip, show the video clip, and then talk about what it's meant to them. So again, that gives them an opportunity to practice, but also gives them the incentive to do some offline research as well.
Yeah, and that's very much, you just ask the students, would anybody like to?
Yeah.
Smashing. Okay, and last question, and it's a kind of trick question because it's 3 things. The top 3 things that you do to keep students coming and engaged with your lectures.
I think the number 1 thing that I do that I know keeps students coming is I learn their names, and it's just a simple thing, but the fact that I can say, you know, Sophie or Henry or, you know, Sonny or whoever, you know, I didn't see you in class last week, or where were you? I often get students writing to me if they're not going to be able to attend. They write to me and they tell me, and I think that says something about the fact that they know that I know who's in the classroom or not. So I think that's one thing. I think trying to make the sessions engaging through getting their interactions so that they know that the session is going to be an experience as well as just kind of a kind of talking session. And I think also by one of the things that I do in class is I try and get them to learn from each other as well. So at the beginning, the very beginning of our tutorial sessions, I always do a game where we learn each other's names so that they know each other's names. I try to get people talking to people other than their friend who always sits next to them. And I think that through those kinds of activities, they build a sense of like we-ness, W-E-ness, that, you know, I think they also experience the class as a kind of a social activity as well, and I think that appeals to people and keeps them coming back.
That's great. Donna Ladkin, thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Thank you, Rob.